depths of your foolishness!
Shadow of the Erdtree raises quite a few questions, despite its many answers. Embedded in that tangle of mystery is the question of Marika's homeland and heritage. As Miyazaki revealed prior to the DLC's release, the Land of Shadow was the first place that Marika ever set foot in the Lands Between. Knowing this, along with her Numen bloodline, we can either surmise that the Numen arrived at the Land of Shadow, or that the Land of Shadow itself is the other dimension referenced in the Numen's lore. The Numen race description reads, "The face of the Numen, supposed descendants of denizens of another world, long-lived but seldom born." The Numen's rune further elaborates on this. The Numen are said to have come from outside the Lands Between, and are in fact of the same stock as Queen Marika herself. But the mystery of the Numen's homeland, and if it's the Land of Shadow or not, isn't quite my focus, nor is it the DLC's. I want to dig deeper than that into Marika's exact bloodline, and what kind of motivations she'd have for creating her new Golden Order after living in subjugation under the Old One. Before moving on, I want to leave you with this last description from the Iris of Grace, which gives further clarification on how the Land of Shadow, or Realm of Shadow, as the description puts it, is called outside of the Land of Shadow. In the Realm of Shadow, this artifice was employed by the priests of the Erdtree to quell the fears of their flock to magnificent effect. Iris of Grace. So let's get into the meat of it. What are the secrets of Marika's bloodline? Well, Ymir puts it quite bluntly while talking of Miquella's purpose in the Land of Shadow. What he says is, "I fear you have borne witness to the whole of it, the conceits, the hypocrisy of the world built upon the Erdtree, the follies of men, their bitter suffering. Is there no hope for redemption? The answer, sadly, is clear. There never was any hope. They were each of them defective, unhinged from the start. Marika herself, and the fingers that guided her. And this is what troubles me. No matter our efforts, if the roots are rotten, then we have little recourse." Ever young Miquella saw things for what they were. He knew that his bloodline was tainted, his roots mired in madness. A tragedy, if there ever was one, that he would feel compelled to renounce everything, when the blame lay squarely with the mother. Ymir's dialogue is, as usual, a monumental glimpse into some of the deeper secrets of Elden Ring. What I find to be most critically important, as regarding to Marika, are the references to how Miquella's bloodline is mired in madness, how the roots themselves are rotten, and how Ymir raises a question of if any recourse at all is even possible in an order that has been broken from the start. So why was it broken from the start? What rotten roots does Marika hail from? Well, I'll make my position clear. Midra and Nanaya are Marika's parents. They raised her in the shaman village of her homeland before Midra received some unknown privileges from the rulers of the Old Order that allowed him to build his manse in what is now called the Abyssal Woods. From everything we can tell of Midra's manse, it was once a prosperous place that grew the same flowers as the ones seen in Shaman Village and again in Daminula, the Windmill Village. These flowers are key to understanding the links between Marika's original heritage and the shaman culture that she was a part of, as well as how the culture would survive under the Golden Order. Midra's manse, much like most things in Elden Ring, was doomed despite its initial prosperity. And doomed with the manse were Midra's original people, the people of the shaman village who were prized for the way that their flesh would integrate with others, and so the greater potentates of the Bani village would kidnap and murder the people of the shaman village. What is so key about this narrative is that the greater potentates of the Bani village very specifically wore the masks of the Horn Sense, the people of Belurat, who were a very ruling class, higher society portion of the prehistory's culture, and who had a known history of subjugation and oppression. The tooth whip reads, "Whip bestrewn with rotting, misshapen teeth, filthy and seething with disease. The teeth are embedded in the whip and dose the victim with deadly poison upon each strike. As the wounds ripen, they grow inflamed and ooze pus. The flesh of shamans was said to meld harmoniously with others." And what we grimly learn upon investigating the shaman village is that by the time Marika gained the power to save her people, there was no one left to save. The minor erditry incantation reads, "Secret incantation of Queen Marika. Only the kindness of gold, without order. Create a small illusory erditry that continuously restores the HP of nearby allies." Marika bathed the village of her home in gold, knowing full well that there was no one left to heal. Before moving on, I'd like to reinforce the shaman village's idea of heritage by noting that Melina is the only one to have learned the secret incantation of Marika. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but you see a narrative progression in how Marika's first child that had a vision of fire was Messmer, and Messmer inflicted his vision in a wrathful way upon Marika's old enemies after seeing the evils of Bani village and the crimes that the Hornsent committed against his mother's people. But her second child, Melina, who shares that vision of flame, was instead nurtured by Marika, and in that nurturing, Marika didn't tear out her eye to replace it with grace. She instead taught Melina of grace, of the world, so that Melina might help undo the sins of Marika's past. There's a narrative progression to Marika's arc and how she changes. So now that we've connected Midra's manse to the shaman village, while also connecting Belurat to Bani village, we can now explore the mystery of Midra's social status. Like I said previously, he seems to have held some sort of status before his fall to the Frenzied Flame, as evidenced by the very existence of the manse and the multiple servants that once served Midra. His social standing was even high enough that it warranted 2 horned warriors guarding his manse. Of course, this social status was lost when the Inquisitors came for Midra, so that they could pierce him with their golden barbs and silence his ideas of chaos. By the time the player arrives to the Land of Shadow, it's very clear that the Hornsent revile the Abyssal Woods. The map of the Abyss reads, "Map of the Abyss at the east of the Gravesite Plain. A thick forest sprawls at the depths of the ravine that is untouched even by sunlight. Known as the Sanctum of Sage Midra, and it is a region forbidden by the Hornsent." Before continuing further, I want to connect the micro-narrative of Marika's parentage to the macro-narrative of the Spiral. From Software has always explored dualism as one of its primary themes. Whether this dualism is between existence versus non-existence, light versus dark, enlightenment versus bestiality, or causality versus regression, it remains dualism as a concept, and we see this idea again in Belurat's reverence of the Spiral. The Spiral represents the twin directions of evolution along the Crucible. To ascend the Spiral in Belurat culture is to allow the overgrowth of horns across your body so that your very form might become a receptacle for the divine. And we see this both with the divine beast warriors as well as the tutelary deities that were so important to Belurat's culture. The divine beast helm reads, "A helm of tangled horn attached to a divine beast mask, allowing the wearer to invoke divinity, worn by the divine beast warriors, the chosen of the horned warriors. Divine invocation heightens intensity of the storm alongside strength and dexterity, but reduces the restorative effect of drinking from a flask of sacred tears. Focus is also trebled by wearing this helm." The horned warrior helm further reads, "Helm featuring a crown of sturdy tangled horns, allowing the wearer to invoke divinity. Attire of the horned warriors, keepers of the tower." In this example of the horned warriors, we see how those born with the capacity to grow horns would have grown to be larger and were given an honored position in society. If they were able to hone that talent to its fullest extent, then they'd have been given the high honor of becoming a divine beast warrior, someone who enacts the dance of a divine beast so that they themselves could become closer to the top of the spiral, closer to divinity. We further learn in Upper Belurat that the divine bird warriors were the first of this class of people, which gives interesting connotations to the twin bird as well as to gold. The divine bird warrior reads, "Armor of divine bird warriors, the very first of all horned warriors. Made from a golden metal, the golden-hued divine birds are known to be cruel, never taking to human companionship. Those who invoked their divinity were far and few between. Belurat's tacit cruelty is further enforced by the aloofness of the divine bird warriors, but what is also enforced is their desire for divinity. The Spira incantation reads, "Superior sorcery of the tower priests, wield as an incantation of the spiral. Wrap one's arms together and hold them up to the heavens to summon a spiral of light that erupts at the enemy's feet. Column of light persists for as long as the button is pressed. The spiral is a normalized crucible current that one day will form a column that stretches to the gods." The belief that normalizing a crucible current will one day form a column that stretches to the gods is intensely fascinating. It has strong Tower of Babel imagery to it, and warrants an entire video dedicated to this very topic. After all, the spiral tree seal opens an entire can of worms to consider with this fascinating religion. The spiral tree seal reads, "Sacred seal of soiled amber, engraved with a spiral tree design, enhances spiral incantations. The majesty of the White Tower, stretching to reach the gods, even inspired a secret faith in the invaders, the people of the Erd Tree." But the people of Belurat had also to contend with the lower half of the spiral, the base instincts that ever encroached against enlightenment. We see this in their tutelary deities, who are curse blades who fully embrace the ascetic life to the point of ritual suicide, an act that we also interestingly see performed at Faramazula with the beast clergymen. The revered spirit ash reads, "Spirit ash of those who came before, infused with potent spirituality, acquired from the corpses of horn scent and other objects that ritually decorate townships and villages across the realm of shadow. Consume these at sites of grace to bolster your revered spirit ash blessing. The revered spirit ash blessing bolsters both summoned spirits and spectral steeds' abilities." The withered corpses were called tutelary deities, and revered spirit ash was said to quietly accumulate in the palms of their hands. And while we see minor acceptance of the curse blades, the acceptance is conditional and only given at the cost of asceticism and eventual death, so that they might rise to become tutelary deities, so that they might rise to benefit Belurat. This acceptance is very conditional. Any who didn't stick to the path were imprisoned and forgotten, much like the omen of Marika's time. The Curseblade Mira spirit ash reads, "Curseblades appear to dance when they spin their shimmering circular blades. These ascetics, who failed to become tutelary deities, were a scourge for those who attempted to invade the horn-sent homeland. Long ago, before the land was overshadowed by invasion, this scourge was shunned, and the Curseblades were imprisoned. It was during this confinement that Mira met Libirth, and upon her death, Libirth was plunged into a devastating darkness. This cruel treatment of the Curseblades, who were only cursed by the way of birth, is further exemplified by the fact that on their path to become tutelary deities, they were forced into self-flagellation on top of ritual suicide. The Curseblade Cirque reads, "Long ago, this was employed by the ascetics who strove to become tutelary deities as a ritualistic object in their self-flagellating dances." So what have we learned about the horn-sent people of Belurat, the Tower? We've learned that they had very strict ideas about both evolution and devolution, and that these ideals were embodied by their tower priests who learned sorceries like Spira so that they might create a normalized crucible current. What we'll learn further is that the other spells cast by the tower priests no longer refer to them as priests, but instead as inquisitors. In such a way, we see that the lower priests of Belurat were turned towards an inquisitorial intent. This raises the question of what they considered to be heresy. I believe that question has its answer in the lower base of the spiral. The Furnace Visage reads, "A smaller imitation of the Furnace Golem's visage. Exceedingly rare to find. A stone mask surrounded by curled horns, depicting the fell god of fire that haunts the sagas of the Hornsent. If the ideal of the spiral exists as a normalized current, then would the base of the spiral be a chaotic current? And what better way to represent chaos than rampant evolution? The talisman of all crucibles reads, a giant mass of intermingling crucible attributes, reduces damage taken from critical hits and headshots, and improves the effectiveness of rolling and backstepping, but also increases damage taken at all times. Rumored to have sprouted upon giants, and is known as the mother of crucibles in ancient tower lore. We see this massive evolution to be in direct contrast to what the Hornsent desire, which is refinement through evolution, not uncontrollable evolution. In such a way, Marika's own desires of normalizing the crucible current into that of the Erd Tree is not dissimilar from the Hornsent's wishes. The fine crucible feather talisman reads, a talisman fashioned from thin feathers that embody the aspects of various creatures, said to have grown on the human body long ago. Hornsent view the crucible as sacred for the refinement wrought through its evolutionary gifts, most prominently their tangled horns. So how does Midra fit into all of this? Well, based off of the lingering ghosts dialogue in the Manse, Midra was lowborn, which fits into the idea that his birthplace was the shaman village. So he could not have held his position by right of blood. Neither does it seem like he was any sort of warrior. He doesn't have the horns of the horned warriors, nor does he have the size or abilities of one. So perhaps he earned his social status through knowledge. We know the people of Belurat to have revered spirits and sprites, and if the word shaman in shaman village is anything to go off of, then it's likely that the shamans had a special affinity to spirits. The spirit gravestone reads, a piece of a gravestone that has started to turn into a spirit, mainly found on the gravesite plane. In places to where the dead have been brought since antiquity, the oldest gravestones turn into spirits, and then fade away. In this description, we see how flesh turns to spirit over time, after death, and not just flesh, but everything around the concept of death. We further see in the sprite stone, its description reads, a row burrow inhabited by a sprite, craftable item, uses FP to release a sprite that slowly homes in on enemies. After a short time, the sprite fades away into glittering lights, causing a spiritual explosion on its passing. According to the records left by Hornsent scholars, there were also contrivances known as bondstones that could manipulate the moment that the sprite vanishes. The fire spirit stone further reads, of all the sprites, the fire spirits are said to be the most boisterous in nature. While sprites are altogether a mystery, what we can confirm about them is that they exist as immortal spirits that vanish and reappear over time. We can further confirm that this was a practice of the Hornsent that they themselves revived by studying even older ruins of antiquity. This confirms another classic Dualism where the lore details ancient peoples from histories now lost to time. The Antiquity Scholar's Cookbook reads, a record of crafting techniques left by the Hornsent academics who studied the ancient ruins of Rao. Details techniques for working with sprites thought lost to antiquity. Acquire the knowledge to craft the following. The study of ancient history is further reinforced by the map for the Cerulean coast, which reads, map of the southern shores of the gravesite plain, a captivating vista of brilliant blue flowers intermingled with colossal stone coffins of unknown origin that seemingly drifted to this place. To the east, the jagged peak thrusts upward into the clouds. And this works perfectly with the idea that the Land of Shadow is a place where all forms of death drift. This idea gets into a broader idea that once again threatens to go beyond the scope of this video, but suffice it to say, I think that the presence of these giant godly tombs was proof to Mikkel that what he was trying to do was foolhardy. So rather than accept his doubts and abandon the path, he instead abandoned St. Trina along with his doubts and his love. To get back to Midra, we can finally examine the downfall of his mansion now that we understand the Inquisitors of Belurat and how they saw the base end of the spiral as chaotic and profane. Flame has been repeatedly used as a symbol of chaos, of uncontrollable power, evolution, anger, and while it symbolizes the crucible which the Hornsent revere, it also symbolizes the baseness of chaotic evolution which they scorned. If the symbolic ties between baseness and flame have not been fully evident so far, one need only look to Messmer, whose flames of war were waged against Belurat, and who Marika's people saw as barbaric for what they did to the shaman village and others. But in waging that war of annihilation, Messmer and his knights, who reveled in bloodshed, would become the basest of all. The church insignia reads, "A talisman depicting a raised spear on a backdrop of flames, in remembrance of the lives lost in the sacred crusade led by Messmer. Raises attack power after defeating an enemy. The warriors who fought in the crusade set aside both honor and mercy to wantonly impale and scorch those deemed impure, those who felt invigorated by each cry of death, with a sane minin who were certain of the sanctity of the campaign." Rain of Fire further reads, "Incantation of Salza, sage of the Fire Knights, summons a cloud of flame overhead that rains fire for a short time. Charging increases potency. Salza's disdain for barbarism never waned, even as he burned more villages and scorched more land than any other." Finally, the Ember of Messmer itself reads, "Serpentine, cord-like ember, mainly found in Scadu Altus, a remnant of Messmer's flame, the symbol of the crusade. It continues to smolder as if crawling across the ground." We see this direct connotation between the grim fires of war and the abyssal serpent best embodied in Messmer. The idea of the abyssal serpent being key in our further understanding of Midra, who lives in what is now called the Abyssal Woods. The Remembrance of the Impaler reads, "Remembrance of Messmer the Impaler, hewn into the Scadu tree. A malevolent snake writhed within Messmer, and so his very mother plucked out his eye and put in its place a seal of grace. Yet having done so, her fear compelled her to secret away her child within the realm of shadow, hidden away, keeping company with the original sin, and the hatred that would not be confined." The malevolent snake that writhed within Messmer was an inner hatred that he was either born with or he was inspired to hold by seeing the wrongdoings committed against his mother and his people. We even see a shedded snake skin discarded in Bani village near where you acquire the "Oh Mother" gesture, which is required to access the shaman village in the first place. Messmer's actions against Belurat were done with explicit knowledge of their transgressions against his mother. What is more interesting is that the seal of grace placed in lieu of Messmer's eye in an item that we can find in-game, which reads, "Golden remnants of the grace personally bestowed by Queen Marika to the heroes who joined the crusade for her. The brilliance of Queen Marika's grace blinds even the very best." We can assume from this description and other context clues that Messmer was most likely one of the first to be blessed by Marika's rune. What is interesting to consider is the idea that Messmer was born with the abyssal serpent of fire and chaos and baseness inherent to himself. It was something about him that predated the genocide against Belurat. In that way, Messmer was a monster who was unleashed during the crusade, not simply someone who was made into a monster by the crusade, even if he is most likely haunted by what he did. This is so key to our understanding of Midra, because we can once again look back to Ymir's dialogue, which reads, "He knew that his bloodline was tainted, his roots mired in madness." We further learn that Messmer despised the fire within himself, most likely because he knew exactly what it symbolized. Messmer's orb reads, "Messmer despised his own fire. Time and time again he hoped to rid himself of it, but ever did it burn." The imagery of the ability when used by Messmer sees a great serpent with the orb within its jaws. This imagery is something we've seen before with Rykard, as evidenced by Bernal's hammer. The Devourer's scepter reads, "Scepter in the shape of a serpent devouring the world. This weapon will one day become the very symbol of the Lord of Blasphemy." a vision of the future briefly seen by Rykard in his final moments before being devoured by the Great Serpent. Rykard holds a surprising amounts of similarities to Messmer, right down to the shared thematic idea of fire as a symbol of chaotic cleansing. This idea of a serpent devouring the world is a powerful piece of imagery, and it could be interpreted as Messmer's simmering hatred for the world itself. After all, he knows full well that his mother has abandoned him in the land of shadow, so that he might forevermore guard the shadow tree and obscure the past transgressions of himself and the Golden Order. In this way, Messmer, just like Rykard, retains an amount of honor in his actions, just in different ways. Where Rykard finds honor by placing himself above the foolish pretenses of the Two Fingers prophecies, Messmer finds honor in restraining himself from spreading his ire and flame across the world. Messmer's armor reads, Black armor of Messmer the Impaler, draped with a red cloak bearing his crest embroidered. On his mother's wishes, Messmer made himself a symbol of fear, undertaking the cleansing crusade she desired. Direct thy maledictions, thine ire, and thy grief towards me alone. This is an honor shared by a third individual, Midra, whose only goal when left alone in his manse was to endure the everlasting pain of the frenzied flame that dwelt inside of him, all so he might spare the world from his wrath. The remembrance of the Lord of Frenzied Flame reads, As the golden barbs inflicted eternal agony upon him, Midra held fast to Nanaya's entreaty. Endure. The word was a curse. These golden barbs that were inflicted upon Midra tell the final part of our story, for it was the Inquisitors of the Tower that wielded golden barbs as their divine punishment. The barbed staff spear reads, Great Staff of Jory, the Elder Inquisitor. The tip bristles with golden barbs, symbolic of the Inquisition's torture, allowing one to wield the staff as a great spear. Attacks deal holy damage, and potency increases with faith. We see further association between the Inquisitors and gold with the golden horn tender that was used as currency by the Horn Cent. It reads, Old currency used by the Horn Cent made by coating spiral horns with gold, once bestowed upon Inquisitors as an honor. So now we have the full story of what, but we still lack the why. We theorize that Midra is Marika's father, and that he's then from the shaman village as a result. We understand this through the shared naming scheme from Midra to Marika to Messmer, and we hear this from Ymir in how Marika's bloodline's roots are mired in madness. We see the story of how Midra was punished by Belurat Inquisitors and how the Horn Cent now revile the Abyssal Woods and all that they stand for. We see how two of Marika's children, Messmer and Amalina, share a vision of fire that Midra himself might have once held. We see how the base Abyssal Serpent turns the divine crucible into the frenzied flame by miring it in madness and despair that will cyclically never end. We learn from context clues how the people of Belurat saw the frenzied flame, and how they described it as the aging untouchable, which is an incredibly fascinating term. The torn diary page reads, A discarded page ripped from a diary, bearing a passage written in a tremulous hand. I touched him, but only once, when he thrust his staff in my face. I brushed it aside. It was then that I touched him, the aging untouchable. We see in this torn note how instead of referring to Midra's affliction as the frenzied flame, the servant, likely a Horn Cent, calls it the aging untouchable instead. If I were to hazard a guess based on what we've described before about how the Horn Cent feel about refining evolution through the Crucible, then the aging untouchable could represent the opposite of that, an infinite cycle of formless and thoughtless evolution. And we see that in the Lord of Chaos ending of Elden Ring itself. We see further confirmation that the Horn Cent abhor the Abyssal Woods in the Winter Lanternfly description, which reads, Winged insect carrying a dangling frenzied flame grape, flies lazily around the Abyssal Forest. said to be heralds of the aging untouchable, and seeing these, the wise know to stay well clear of that place. A final reason for the horn scent to revile the frenzied flame could be found by investigating its similarities to Messmer's flame, and why exactly Torrent is so scared of the flame. We learn from Vago, who guards the church leading down to the path to the abyssal woods, that Messmer's flame can be used to resurrect soulless bodies, as in, the people that it resurrects, it burns their souls away even if it brings the body back. As if the flame burns any soul it touches, but it's weird, isn't it? We see this idea refined in how Messmer's furnace golems burn away both body and soul to power themselves. The Death Mask helm reads, Helm of Vago, elder among the Fire Knights. 2 warped death masks stacked one atop the other. Gnawed at by loneliness, the old man turned his attention to the spirituality of Messmer's flame, using it in a rite of resurrection. Yet the soulless bodies he brought to life were no comfort to poor Wego. The hefty furnace pot further reads, The furnace's flames burn away both body and soul. When impurity is thus expunged, one calls it cleansing. In these descriptions, we see how Messmer's flame is an obliterating force. The flames of the abyssal serpent burn away all in the method akin to what the frenzied flame itself does. While we don't see as much explicit information about the 3 fingers as I'd like, we do see their effect referenced even if the culture of the horn scent knew the frenzied flame by the older term of the aging untouchable. There still exists the 3 fingers, and it seems to have existed alongside Midra. This further adds to the idea of the 3 fingers being held captive under the Earth Tree in what is by modern times called the tomb of an ancient god. The swollen grape found in Midra's manse is called an eyeball of the frenzied flame that has swollen from within, exceedingly rare to find, marked with fingerprint burns, proof of having been touched directly by the 3 fingers' embrace. It is important to note that the swollen grape is almost identical to the fingerprint grape dropped by Vike, which implies what I said before about the 3 fingers actively giving its blessing to some of those who lived at Midra's manse. As of yet, I'm not sure where I fit the exact entombment of the 3 fingers into the narrative timeline, and honestly I don't think it's that important. I think what is important and what we can tell is that the 3 fingers were most likely free during Midra's time, but were eventually entombed by the time of Marika's reign. And despite that, there is the possibility of a reading where they were always entombed and Midra simply found them. The fingerprint stone shield reads, a great stone shield with an intricately carved fingerprint design. Part of the tomb of an ancient god, the readerless fingers relayed their message through these imprints, said to be the very seeds from which frenzy at first sprouted. I think it's most reasonable to assume that From Software uses said as a way of not fully committing to the bit. Said to be the very seeds leaves room for the interpretation that this is not only the modern belief about frenzy, whereas in reality it comes from a much older source. Honestly, I think one of the most important parts of the description is in how it describes the carved fingerprint design, which is repeated throughout the DLC in certain areas. If we take Mater, the mother of fingers, into account, we can start to get a fuller picture of the creation of the 3 fingers, as well as a possible line of speculation as to how and why Midra rose to prominence in the Horn-Scent society. Of course, there is almost no explicit text regarding the 3 fingers, and certainly nothing regarding its creation, at least that I've found so far. We are left to speculate about that ourselves, knowing what we know now about the Abyssal Serpent and the base end of the spiral as a thematic and symbolic device. So speculate we shall. The fingers, after all, are a delightful mystery to unravel. The remembrance of the Mother of Fingers reads, the mother of all 2 fingers and finger creepers was in turn a magnificently gleaming daughter of the Greater Will, and the first shooting star to fall upon the lands between. This idea of the greater will's influence arriving with a starfall confirms what was always suspected about the heretic's rise and the founding reign of stars. It's the heretic's rise because seeing sorcery as equal to incantations is heresy to the Golden Order. But what the fundamentalists, as well as Ymir, truly understand is that glintstone and amber both arrive from the same formless void in the sky that may represent the greater will. The founding reign of stars reads, the eldest primeval sorcery, said to have been discovered by an ancient astrologer, a sorcery of legendary status, summons a dark cloud of stars overhead, thought to be the founding glintstone sorcery. The glimpse of the primeval current that the astrologer saw became real, and the stars amber rained down on this land. Ymir's faith as a source of power is best shown by the beloved Stardust item, which reads, Count Ymir was known for his recitations. One need only envision the romance of the stars above with adoration for stardust in one's heart to become a great sorcerer. Do so, and you will know love. And it's this exact faith that was most likely shared by the first primeval sorcerer, the first astrologer that manifested the primeval currents into their own world. Taking this knowledge of the stars, we can then cross-reference Ymir, an ancient scholar who understands the true cosmology of the world, and Selen, a modern scholar seeking to uncover that very cosmology. Selen, when asked about glintstone sorcery, will have this to say. Our art draws upon the powers embedded in glintstone. What is the nature of such life? Glintstone is the amber of the cosmos. Golden amber contains the remnants of ancient life and houses its vitality, while glintstone contains residual life, and thus the vitality of the stars. It should not be forgotten that glintstone sorcery is the study of the stars, and the life therein, a fact that is lost on most sorcerers these days. Selen describes the energies that manifest in the player's red HP bar, which represents the fiery crucible energy and ancient vitality of amber, and in the player's blue FP bar that exists with spiritual, starry, residual energy. If we look to the earth and see the crucible, then it explains why Belurat's sole worship of the crucible would heighten their physicality at the cost of their FP, their minds. If we then look to the greater will arriving simultaneously with the founding reign of stars, you see a new interest arise in souls and stars and holiness during that middle time between Marika's rise and before Belurat's fall. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's get back to the cross-referencing of dialogue. Ymir has this to say when you first meet him. I am a glintstone sorcerer. We study the stars and examine the life therein. Are you familiar with our findings? Long ago, we began as stardust, born of a great rupture far across the skies. We, too, are children of the greater will. Is that not divine? Is that not sublime? And yet none can fathom its implications, its utter brilliance. This great rupture far across the skies can be taken in a number of ways. Is this the bursting of the one great and the beginning of all life from a once empty void? Perhaps. Could it instead be read that Ymir is referencing we as humans, or as more specifically glintstone sorcerers? Also, perhaps. The difference in these readings is significant when considered with the One Great and the Crucible. My personal reading as of now is that Ymir is referencing we as those who have souls, souls being blue FP minds that are born of the stars. In this way, humans received their souls from the founding reign of stars, where before that they were simply beasts who operated purely by refining the crucible to attain greater heights. In this way, the we who began as stardust are the souls fallen to earth. When cross-referenced back to Selen's dialogue, we see this further still. She has this to say after completing her quest. With the bodies of Masters Azur and Lusat returned, the Academy can hone the primeval current, so that we, fallen children of the stars, shall beam with brilliance once again. My apprentice, will you stay with us, here at the Academy? Oh, I know it's not possible. You have your own calling, to be the next Elden Lord. But do think of me, of your teacher, on the eve of your crowning. You will always be my darling pupil. Rest assured that no, the entire Academy will swear allegiance to the new monarch. My apprentice, become Elden Lord. She goes on to say, with time, uh, what she says is, here is a symbol of my allegiance and the Academy's. Do you recall what I once told you? That glintstone is the amber of the cosmos, and sorcery is the study of the stars and the life therein? When you become Elden Lord, please illuminate me. Lay bare the secrets of life which course the Elden Ring. Next time, I will be your student. This dialogue has a lot to unpack, most important of which to my theory of the cosmos being how Selen refers to herself as we fallen children of the stars, which she says very much so in the context of a sorceress hoping to ascend to greater heights after being held back for a very long time. There is further evidence to unpack in the concept of the primeval sorcerers, but that is too much to discuss here. What I want to try to affirm as a theory is that the founding reign of stars and creation of life that Ymir references may work better narratively and thematically as a reference to the delivery of souls to the lands between, where before they operated based off of a different kind of crucible or animal intelligence. At the same time, it is important to note that this theory lays in the realm of nebulous speculation. It's something I believed even before the DLC, and it's something that has more evidence now, but even now, it is still up for different viewpoints and interpretations. It could very well be the true creation of the cosmos and all life. That's the beauty of Elden Ring and the speculation it allows for. I leave this discussion with one last famous quote from Hayata. All that there is came from the one great. Then came fractures, and births, and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse, every one born of the mistake. And so, what was borrowed must be returned. Melt it all away with the yellow chaos flame, until all is one again. Hayata, upon learning the wisdom of the three fingers. If I were to recontextualize this with my own understanding, I would say instead, first came fractures as the divine ancient dragon splintered off from the crucible that was Placidusax. Then came births of animals who refined themselves into hornsent and beastmen and giants. Then came souls from the deliverance of the greater will and the great rupture across the cosmos. But the greater will made a mistake. It tried to cut away the base end of the spiral from the crucible and install a god of compassion over the lands between, whose reign would last 1,000 years, etc., etc. But I digress. Moving on, what is so important about the founding reign of stars to the land of shadow is what we already knew in-game made explicit. We see the creation of the ruined forges, made to smith for the very first time in history with the newly fallen meteorite, and within the flames of their forges, smiths saw divine scripts sent by the Greater Will, or the Frenzied Flame, and through this script, the smiths learned how to imbue souls into material. The smithing talisman reads, in ancient times, smithing was a divine act, and blacksmiths interpreted the script they perceived in the wrinkles of molten steel to imbue weapons with souls. The ability to imbue these souls at all reinforces the previous theory of souls arriving with the founding reign of stars, and more importantly to the narrative of Marika's rise to power, we see how the act of smithing becomes a divine act. The anvil hammer reads, one of the treasures of the ruined forges, a tremendous hammer that incorporates as its head the red-hot anvil of the forge. It is said that the anvil's shape is inspired by that of an altar, and that long ago it was indeed used as such in rite and ritual. What is so utterly fascinating about this act of smithing being divinely inspired by the greater will, by lieu of working meteorite or sent by the aforementioned greater will, is that the original blacksmiths were fire giants, the very beings that the Hornsent feared for their baseness and their fell god. In this deliverance of the greater will coming to Earth is also a damnation in how it both heightens enlightenment and deepens despair. The hammer found near Hugh's forge reads, "Hammer comprised of a large stone affixed to a metal handle, originally a blacksmith's tool. The art of smithing is said to have originated among the giants. This weapon's striking attacks boast ample weight behind them." The Misbegotten further this connection between smithing and the crucible. The red-haired and misshapen beings who are inexorably connected to the fire giants, and through that connection to the crucible. This is further reinforced by the fact that they as an enemy type are most commonly found in the ruined forges when exploring the DLC. I honestly don't know if they appear anywhere else. And it's these very ruined forges that make up the key of the transition period between the Old Order and the Golden Order. It's these forges that were built at the time of the founding Reign of Stars, and it's these forges where the script of the Greater Will was discovered to be divine. It's from this time period that Midra, the Mother of Fingers, was born as the first star to fall in the founding reign, and it's during this period that Midra most likely gave birth to the Two Fingers so that they could orate the Greater Will's wisdom. It seems very likely to me that during this era, Midra may have risen to prominence through lieu of smithing or some other sagely duty, an occurrence that makes a lot of sense when considering the social and economic upheaval that would go hand in hand with this kind of cosmic event. It's during this event that new Erd tree buds would grow abundantly with the other buds of the prehistory, even to the point that Belurat itself has them planted in their city. Albeit these are weird flesh trees that have people grown into them in a more literal way than before, so there's complications. It's during this period that the divine towers were likely built to venerate the Greater Will and Elden Ring, built using the meteorite ore that crashed with the founding Reign of Stars. And if we assume Midra to be the spellsmith that I theorize he was, Marika's relationship with Hugh could even be speculated to have begun during this time period through association with her father's co-workers. But even during this new age of enlightenment, the persecution of Marika's people continued, as did the persecution of others across the world by horn-sent inquisitors. Tangentially to this entire story was a civil war between the dragons, where Baal, a mortal dragon, attacked and wounded Placidusax in an act of frenzied wrath. Baal's heart burns with such hatred that even when killed, he would rise again from the body of whoever foolishly consumed his heart, all so that he could continue his campaign against Placidusax and the ancient dragons. So the ancient dragons, much like the inquisitors of Belurat, hunted their more base kin. As if to add insult to injury, it's likely that the affliction of Deathroot would begin on Farum Azula during this time as well, an affliction that remains to modern day, and is most likely caused by the existence of the Elden Ring and destined death within the sphere of earthly existence. All of these ruinous events tell a story of chaos and strife that, just like real life, impinge upon the peace and prosperity of the land. Like I said at the beginning of the article, dualism plays a key role in From Software's narrative structures and in Elden Ring. It really is as simple of a thing as saying that you can't have good without evil, that there is no golden era that can exist ad infinitum. And From Software tells that macro-level theme of accepting both sides of the spiral, both up and down, in the micro level of Marika's personal journey, how she sees her father, Midra, fall to the Frenzied Flame, and how she believes that she can rise above that ruin and create a true age of compassion that will last for 1,000 years. We see this rejection of the base of the spiral personified in Marika leaving one of her previously dual braids at the feet of her dead grandmother in the shaman village. The golden braid reads, "A braid of golden hair, cut loose, Queen Marika's offering to the grandmother." What was her prayer, her wish, her confession? There is no one left to answer, and Marika never returned home again. Yet we also understand just how close Marika was to the madness that she was abandoning when we see her father, Midra, and her son, Messmer. We even see how Marika herself has a dual aspect in Radigan, who has flaming red hair, and who in cut content was the father to the Misbegotten who were touched by the Crucible. Midra's Flame of Frenzy, the description reads, Incantation in praise of Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame. The Lord of Frenzied Flame shall take their torment, despair, their affliction, every sin, every curse, all melted away. Yet Midra, like others before him, was too weak to become a lord. So in conclusion, Marika's lineage is traced back to the shaman village where her grandmother's body still lies. Her father, Midra, gained high social standing in the land of Belurat by relation to the ruined forges and starfall event that brought the greater will to this world. By working the metals of the meteoric ore, he saw a divine script and most likely worked tangentially to the fire giants and misbegotten smiths. During this time, Midra would have been made most painfully aware of his position of wealth and prosperity as his fellows from the village of his birth were captured and killed. In his despair, he may have come upon the script of the readerless fingers, the three fingers, who most likely came to be through some sort of distortion of Mater's two fingers. Three is an alchemical symbol of volatility, after all, and if the frenzied flame existed before as a corrupting influence, why should the voice of God be any different? Why should it be free from the possibility of corruption? And through all of this interaction, Midra likely fell to the lure of the frenzied flame as a permanent end to all the pain and suffering that he and his people must endure. This would not result in Midra's immediate end, however. He continued his metalworking and continued to sagely divine the words of God. Yet during this time his servants came to know of his descent into madness, and through that knowledge, through that realization of his own depths of despair, they too came to be afflicted with frenzy. And in this shared madness, they began to exalt the frenzied flame as a new lord of the land. The Aged One's exaltation reads, a talisman depicting the exaltation of the aging untouchable, whose head resembles a sprig of ripe grapes. Raises attack power when madness is triggered in the vicinity. Gift your madness to our Lord, bless our brethren with grapes. Take care that they fully ripen. And in their shared frenzy, they drew down upon them the wrath of the inquisitors of Belurat that would burn their heretical texts and put the frenzied heretics to death outside the manse. They would leave Midra inside after piercing golden barbs through his spine to ensure that he'd be unable to rise as a Lord of Chaos without them being removed. The Great Sword of Damnation reads, golden greatsword that once pierced the body of Midra, master of the manse, used by the Hornsent in the execution of a damnation like no other. The barbs that pierce the victim from within wind gently around the blade. Yet this back and forth of retribution would only ever create more frenzy in a spiral of revenge and madness. The Madding Hand reads, forged of an unyielding black impulse toward revenge fostered in those who were hunted down as heretics by their own brethren, these are the weapons of the utterly downtrodden. And in seeing her father's downfall, and knowing what madness he fell to and the depths of despair that he reached, Marika resolves to end the cycle of violence once and for all by cutting off the base end of the spiral and crushing all of her enemies forevermore. She seduces her way into Belurat using her father's social status so that she might create the Divine Gate. With her new godhood, she recruits Godfrey to wage war against the fire giants. Once she establishes her power, she orders Messmer to call the Hornsent so that they might never be able to exact retribution for her stealing the power of divinity from them. Something that, from how they call Marika Strumpet, is very obviously true. Like, they held a grudge. She was right in a... It's not that she was right, it's that it's a cycle of violence. And we see how Marika thinks that she can end it forever, and how she fails. And she fails when she realizes that the abyssal serpent that she sealed away in Messmer, that it will never fade. You know, it's like she realizes that she's the leader of the most barbaric civilization of all by the end of it. That's the narrative behind Marika. It's why she's a tragic figure. It's why Elden Ring does such a good job at exploring godhood and the failings of it. And all of this was already in the base game. Marika realizing that she failed to seal away the fell god was always explicitly in the text. The fell god and the fire giants could always be plausibly connected to the Erd tree and the Three Fingers and the Crucible. You burn the Erd tree by stoking their forge, for crying out loud. These are metaphysically connected concepts, symbolically connected concepts. They were just ignored. We can further explain these events in a concrete way by saying that the giants represented the base level of uncontrollable and giant evolution, supremely powerful in flame, but weak in minds. While the Golden Order accepts blue Iridate type nobility, we see this possible union once in the Sword of Night and Flame in the base game, and we see it again in R'Lana in the DLC. With all of that said, I think the DLC is really cool, and I really enjoy the deeper narrative that was revealed about Marika and her direct family. I really enjoy how this plays into the concept of the spiral, even if this kind of dualism is getting a little old by now. And I enjoy how explicit Elden Ring as a game becomes with its overarching theme of rejecting godhood. There's issues, though. I mean, there's a number of issues, to be perfectly certain. Miquella as a character is tarnished, now. Like, the Battle of Aeonia is really stupid. If Miquella was going to become a god and purify his lord and do incest, why didn't he do it with Melania? There's a lot of weirdness to it, and I understand the disappointment. I understand all of that. Um, but yeah, I mean, thanks for watching. Leave your thoughts, your disagreements and agreements, and everything, in the comments below. I enjoy making this because it's a community effort to learn and uncover and share and discuss. Like, you don't enrich yourself or your understanding of a text by saying nothing about it and hearing nothing about it. It's by saying a thing that you establish it in your thoughts, and it's by hearing a thing that you challenge that establishment. It's a back and forth. It's a spiral, even. Um, if we're going to keep comparing it to the text like a head ass, then the top of the spiral isn't good to reach because you forget the back and forth. You forget that the establishment can be disagreed with. It can be wrong, Like, if you look at Miquella with his Age of Compassion, he has to accept the fact that people might not want that, and he can't accept that, which is why he abandoned Saint Trina and his doubts and his love, because he couldn't bring himself to not accept that if he loved them. He had to abandon it. If you look at the base end of the spiral, you see just endless retribution. There's actually a thing in the base game that I could never really fully put to words because it didn't fully make sense with the symbolism we were given, but it makes sense now. I used to describe Marika as representing causality, while Radagon represented regression, and that was mostly based off of Radagon's regressive attitudes towards power and flame in the way that his red hair symbolized the Crucible and the previous state of the Erd tree to me. And it's like, I believe all of that was originally very intended. I don't know how much of it they really knew what they wanted to do with. I mean, the DLC has retcons. I think we have to accept that. Denying it and saying it was all part of the plan is a misreading of what's happening. At the same time, saying everything's a retcon to try and dismiss it out of hand, it's a back and forth. There's a middle ground that we have to reach. And I mean, we're still in the very, very early days of Shadow of the Erd tree releasing it. So there's going to be a lot of discussions, that's my piece. I think that Midra and his position as Marika's father is just a step away from explicit. I think the entire DLC just fits when you think about it that way. It just works really, really, really well. But there's a lot more to be discussed that I haven't, Nanaya deserves a video all on her own. There's references to Nanaya's torch, which is another Lord of Frenzied Flame from a different land before Midra. Like, who is this woman who's going around frenzying people and then telling them not to do it? Like, what's up with that? Um, it's almost like Tanith in a way. In that same vein, the other woman in Midra's life, Marika, deserves a lot more, you know, about her too now. We have this really textual stuff about her father, about Midra, but what do we know about the seduction and the betrayal? What do we know about the divine gate? Who did she seduce in Belurat that gave her access to that? It's all really interesting mysteries. That I mean, I don't, I don't think anyone's gonna fully discover it on their own. I don't think there is any full discovery. It's funny. I think that the America as the Glowmite Queen still works under this lens, even though it's sort of stupid, and it works way better if she's just some America person in Belurat, or if the GEQ is just. I mean, who knows? I really don't myself. Some other theories I want to go over that are just unresolved, but I think are worth mentioning because of how they were briefly touched upon here, are just that, like, I mentioned the Great Rupture theory, the whole idea of souls coming to the lands between at the point of, Glintstone and Amber together. It's very metaphysical. It works with like a demiurgic idea of souls being cast out of heaven. You're children of the stars because you used to be stardust. Um, but despite that, sprites existed before souls in that way. Like that's something that has to be reconciled. I don't really know what I think of the Rao ruins because on that same note, I mentioned that the Hornsent were studying these ancient ruins, but we also know that there's Hornsent that work for Messmer in, the specimen tower. So if these Hornsents are working for Messmer, these might be the antiquity scholars rather than the original people of Belurat. Um, I think it's sort of funny that they use base as a thing. Like base it's a really good term, it works. I think but I don't know, it makes me think of a quote from Dune Messiah where Paul meets a dwarf jester person named Bijaz, and he mentions a play, he mentions the meaning of one of Paul's names, and he says, Usul, it means the base of the pillar, but little do you know that I'm the basest of them all. And that's just, I don't know. I can't not laugh considering the modern context of the word. Finally, I think that, well, I mean, I'd say that dualism is getting old, but like, I mean, I don't know. Dualism is one of the, I don't know, I think it's a really nice worldview in general. I think it's understandable to write literature operating based off of that worldview. I think part of where I mean, like, part of that dualism is getting old is it's getting old in the idea of gods and humans and this divinity and, breakdown of theocracy in the typical JRPG fashion. I guess I want something more like Sekiro. I think Sekiro has a very nice mystical vibe, and it doesn't need to always use all of those things, even though it still also does disparity a lot and dualism a lot. Um, it also reminds me of like when I do describe dualism in Elden Ring, I make a quip about how it's just good versus evil. But, I mean, like, that's just the surface reading of it, as always. I think that, Taoism, I think Taoism most likely plays a very big role in it. One of my favorite ways to explain it, I guess, in the modern context, because, video games is Sifu. It's one of my favorite games, actually, besides Sekiro. In it, the main antagonist's name is Yang, which is the white in the Taoism, and it stands for action. And you, the protagonist, are unnamed, but it's almost certain that you're Yin, your reaction. So, in the plot of Sifu, the antagonist Yang kills Yin's father, both of their fathers, their brothers, 8 years ago, and Yin trains and then sets out to get revenge. So in this way, you see Yang is the action and Yin is the revenge. But inside both of their actions, there's like a chance of one and the other. And I think you see that again in Elden Ring. Like there's a thing where tranquility comes after the Flame of Frenzy in a lot of the base game of Elden. Well, not even base game, but in a lot of the DLC. And in that sense, you know, you reach a form of tranquility at the end of it, in a way. It's just death. You know, it's just endless. You know, in that same vein, at the top of the spiral are the Divine Bird Warriors, who are sort of like vicious sounding. Uh, and not to keep rambling after an already long ramble, not really ramble, it was written beforehand, but the Twin Bird, what does that have to do with the Divine Birds? Who knows? But yeah, I hope you enjoyed. I'll probably post more of these sort of one-time just me episodes giving a monologue in the future if people like it. And of course, I will continue with my Elden Kings podcast probably weekly while all of the hype is going. So, yeah. Thank you as always for watching, and don't you dare go hollow on me.